The automatic camera clicked steadily as Major Robert Cowboy Stoutt, strapped into his F6F Hellcat, climbed to 8,000 feet over Peleliu on September 12, 1944. The morning air was crisp, the Pacific sun glinting off distant waves. His orders were straightforward: photograph the northern airfield and return to the USS Hornet. Simple, routine reconnaissance. Yet Stoutt knew better than to expect simplicity in a war zone. Intelligence reports had described the airfield as likely abandoned, damaged by prior attacks, stripped of operational aircraft. But experience had taught him to distrust appearances. And as he peered down through his canopy, a cold knot formed in his stomach. The airfield below was alive with movement, packed with Japanese planes in meticulous formation. Mitsubishi Zeros and Nakajima bombers lined the tarmac roof to roof, gleaming in the early sunlight. Transport drones nestled in delicate rows, their cargo ready. Underground service vehicles moved around each aircraft like silent shadows. This was no abandoned field. This was a launching point for an overwhelming attack. Stoutt quickly tallied the threat: 40 combat-ready aircraft, fully armed and fueled, all primed to strike. His mind raced through the consequences. In 3 days, Allied intelligence estimated nearly 28,000 planes and ships would converge on the islands, in one of the largest amphibious assaults of the Pacific campaign. These 40 aircraft could strike the first waves before reinforcements even landed. Thousands of Marines could be cut down before they set foot on the beach. As a reconnaissance pilot, Stout's job was simple: see, report, and return. But simplicity offered no comfort now. A lone pilot against a fully armed airfield was a perilous gamble. He knew the military bureaucracy all too well. A report could be filed, a package of recommendations sent up the chain, and hours, maybe a full day, could pass before action was authorized. By then, it could be too late. The Japanese would launch, Marines would fall, lives would be lost. Stout's mind raced. He was 28 years old, with 63 combat missions behind him. He had danced with Zeros over the islands, strafed fortified positions under heavy fire, and seen pilots fall beside him. He understood the fine line between courage and recklessness. Yet hesitation here would mean hundreds of deaths. His Hellcat, armed with 50 caliber Browning machine guns and 2,400 rounds, could not destroy the entire airfield. But if he struck with precision, he could inflict catastrophic damage, enough to disrupt the enemy's attack. The Japanese had made a critical error. Their aircraft were parked too close together, exposed and vulnerable. One well-placed burst could ignite a chain reaction, setting planes ablaze in rapid succession. Stoutt took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that came only in moments of extreme focus. This was a calculated risk, not a blind charge. His fingers danced over the guns, checking the feed, aligning the sights. 12 seconds of continuous fire, just enough to make a difference. He adjusted his Hellcat, climbing slightly to get a better vantage of the northern row. Every detail was critical: the spacing between planes, the angle of approach, the possible trajectory of ricochets. He knew the consequences of error. One lucky hit in the wrong place could destroy his engine or cockpit, sending him plummeting into the dense jungle below. Yet the alternative was far worse. If he did nothing, those 40 aircraft would rain destruction on the landing forces. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Every second carried weight, every breath a calculation. He reviewed his past missions in his mind: strikes on Tarawa, strafing runs against entrenched positions, escapes from flak bursts and dogfights. Experience was his ally now, guiding every microsecond decision. He could not allow fear to cloud judgment. Lives depended on his precision, his discipline, and his courage. The Hellcat roared under him, a beast of metal and fire, obedient to his control. He kept his eyes on the airfield, scanning for vulnerabilities, memorizing positions, and planning the strike that could change the course of the next 3 days. 40 planes, each a potential death sentence for thousands of Marines, waited, and one man, alone in the sky, would determine if they lived or died. Stoutt. He pushed the throttle forward, and the Hellcat responded with a deep, metallic roar, its engine vibrating through the frame like an awakened predator. He descended sharply, the altimeter spinning downward as he dove toward the airfield. The jungle canopy rushed past beneath him, a blur of greens and shadows, until he leveled out just 50 feet above the treetops. His plan relied on surprise. Come in low, hit hard, and pull out before the Japanese anti-aircraft crews could react. The opening in the trees appeared suddenly, a narrow gap leading directly to the northern row of aircraft. For a moment, everything fell eerily silent. Even the thundering engine faded in his mind, replaced by pure instinct and focus. Ahead, Japanese ground crews were moving between planes, fueling, loading, making final checks. Some froze as the Hellcat burst into the clearing. Others fumbled in shock, unsure whether to run or dive for cover. But none were at their guns yet. Stoutt angled the Hellcat toward the tightly parked fighters. The silver skins of the Zeros gleamed beneath him, perfectly aligned targets. His thumb pressed down on the firing switch. All 6 .50 caliber Brownings erupted at once. Flashes of muzzle light strobed across the tarmac, and the gun vibration rattled through the cockpit. Tracer rounds stitched across the runway, hammering into aluminum fuselages with brutal precision. The first Zero shuddered violently as bullets ripped through its engine cowling. Fuel sprayed into the air in glistening arcs, igniting instantly into towering flames. The next 2 aircraft were hit seconds later, their wings shredded, their fuel tanks erupting in bright blasts of orange and white. The effect was immediate, an inferno blooming outward in a deadly chain reaction. Stoutt shifted the Hellcat slightly left, dragging his line of fire through a cluster of fuel drums stacked carelessly between planes. When the bullets hit, the drums burst like grenades, spraying gasoline across the row. The explosion that followed was far larger than he anticipated. A fireball ripped upward nearly 50 feet, flinging debris across the runway and momentarily shaking the Hellcat mid-flight. Behind him, a shock wave rolled across the airfield. But he didn't have time to admire the devastation. He was already climbing, banking hard to avoid the rising column of smoke. Below, the fire leapt from plane to plane, each explosion igniting another. The northern row had become a strip of destruction. Aircraft burning, fuel lines rupturing, storage crates detonating in rapid succession. Ground crew scrambled in panic, some abandoning hoses and tools, others desperately trying to roll aircraft away from the flames. It was chaos. Yet Stoutt knew the job wasn't done. Anti-aircraft crews had reached their guns. A series of sharp flashes erupted from the tree line as the first bursts of 20-millimeter fire streaked toward him. Bright tracers arced through the air like angry hornets, some passing just inches from his wings. A handful found their mark. He felt the jarring impact as shells struck the fuselage behind him, metal tearing under the force. Warning lights blinked to life across his instrument panel. The Hellcat groaned, but held steady. Stoutt climbed sharply, gaining altitude before his second pass. From above, the destruction was unmistakable. Half the northern row was already engulfed in flames, thick black smoke curling into the sky in massive pillars. The fire spread quickly, feeding on exposed fuel lines, ammunition crates, and ruptured tanks. 20 aircraft were likely already destroyed, but another 20 remained intact along the southern stretch. He had to strike again. He checked his ammunition. Half gone. He had maybe 6 seconds of continuous fire left. Not nearly enough to finish the job, unless he was precise. He banked the Hellcat tightly, circling above the growing inferno until he aligned with the southern line of bombers. This time the Japanese gunners were ready. As soon as he leveled out for the dive, the field erupted in anti-aircraft fire. Tracers filled the sky. He dropped altitude quickly, weaving left and right in erratic bursts to throw off the gunner's aim. The cockpit shook as stray shells passed dangerously close. A burst struck near the left wing root, sending a metallic jolt through the airframe. Something tore loose behind him, but the controls remained responsive. He could worry about that later. The bombers were directly ahead now, heavily fueled, lined wing to wing, their sleek bodies reflecting the flames from the burning northern row. He steadied his nerves. One opportunity. No hesitation. Stoutt squeezed the trigger. The remaining ammunition poured out in a concentrated storm of fire. Tracers sliced through the air, ripping into the first bomber's wing and fuel tank. A geyser of gasoline erupted instantly. He dragged the fire across the next plane, punching holes through its fuselage and control surfaces. The third bomber detonated when a bullet struck a crate of munitions beneath its belly. The explosion flipped it backward onto its tail, sending a shockwave rippling across the runway. Stoutt aimed for a fuel truck parked between two bombers. A single burst hit the storage tank, and the vehicle vanished in a violent explosion. Flames rolled outward, engulfing the nearest aircraft. The heat was so intense that Stoutt felt it through the cockpit glass. Secondary explosions erupted one after another. Fuel lines, ammunition stores, oxygen tanks popping in rapid succession. The southern row began to collapse the same way the northern row had moments earlier. Smoke and fire swallowed the tarmac. His guns clicked empty. The Hellcat was out of ammunition. He pulled up sharply, climbing through the rising smoke. The anti-aircraft guns fired wildly now, but the gunners were blinded by flame and debris. Stoutt zigzagged upward, riding the turbulence of the explosions below until he broke through into clean air. The airfield beneath him was unrecognizable, an expanding field of destruction, aircraft reduced to twisted metal, flames consuming everything. He had come alone against 40 enemy planes, and he had torn the airfield apart. Stout's heart pounded as he climbed above the smoke-choked airfield. The roar of his Hellcat's engine was the only sound he could hear over the thunderous explosions below. His arms ached from gripping the controls, sweat slicking his palms. Every fiber of his being was focused on survival. The aircraft had endured punishing bursts of anti-aircraft fire, and the fuselage bore the scars of dozens of near misses. He could feel the metal groaning, threatening to tear apart at any moment. His eyes scanned the horizon. The USS Hornet was somewhere out there, a distant silhouette against the shimmering Pacific. But with the Hellcat's radio dead and the engine sputtering, finding the carrier would be another battle in itself. The thought of ditching so far from friendly ships sent a cold wave of fear through him. He knew the odds. Without the Hellcat's power, a crash into the ocean meant one thing: capture or death. But Stoutt refused to yield. He adjusted the throttle carefully, coaxing the last drops of power from the engine. The propeller stuttered but kept spinning. He trimmed the ailerons, counteracting the damage from the anti-aircraft bursts. Every small adjustment was critical. One wrong move, and the aircraft, battered as it was, could spin out of control. Below, the wreckage of the northern and southern rows of Japanese aircraft still smoldered. Smoke rose in towering columns, twisting skyward like spectral fingers. Secondary fires ignited as ruptured fuel lines and detonating ammunition set off chain reactions. The inferno stretched across the airfield, a monumental testament to the destruction wrought in mere minutes. Stoutt allowed himself a brief glance, noting that the work he had done, alone, had likely saved countless Marines waiting to storm Peleliu's beaches. Then, the anti-aircraft crews regained focus. Heavy 20mm shells streaked toward him from concealed positions. The tracers cut through the smoke, bright lines aimed with deadly precision. One shell struck the left wingtip, sending the Hellcat into a violent wobble. Stoutt fought to stabilize the aircraft, twisting and pushing against the controls until he regained steady flight. His fingers ached, his vision tunneled, but he could not afford hesitation. There was no room for error. 500 feet, 400. He descended toward the ocean, searching for any sign of the Hornet. The anti-aircraft fire followed him relentlessly, growing in intensity. He felt the impact of near misses as chunks of shrapnel pelted the fuselage, cracking panels and rattling the controls. Canopy. The Hellcat groaned like an animal in pain, yet it remained airborne. Then he saw it, a small metallic shape cutting across the water, a destroyer. Relief surged through him, but there was no time to celebrate. The aircraft was still in critical condition. The landing gear hydraulics were destroyed, leaving a belly landing as his only option. The waves below reflected the afternoon sun, each whitecap a potential hazard. One wrong move and the ocean would claim him. Stoutt tightened his harness and focused. He approached the ship in a shallow dive, the Hellcat trembling under its own strain. The crew spotted him almost immediately, pointing and signaling. Hundreds of eyes tracked his descent, some in awe, others in panic. He could feel the tension radiating from them, mirroring the tension that had coursed through him moments ago. He cut the engine, gliding the Hellcat toward the surface. The aircraft shuddered violently as it skimmed over the water, metal screeching and twisting. The belly hit first, sending a wall of spray into the cockpit, drenching him. The wings folded and crumpled under the pressure, the tail twisting grotesquely as the fuselage skidded across the waves. Finally, the aircraft came to rest, motionless, save for the gentle rocking of the Pacific. Stoutt unlatched his harness and kicked open the canopy, plunging into the salty water. He grabbed a floating section of wing, clinging to it as the wreck sank beneath him. Every breath burned in his lungs, every muscle screamed in fatigue, but he remained conscious. Moments later, sailors from the destroyer plunged into the water, strong arms hauling him aboard a makeshift raft. "Pilot, what the hell happened out there?" one asked, breathless and wide-eyed. 40 planes, Stoutt whispered, his voice hoarse. 40, ready to take off. They won't be. The sailors exchanged stunned glances. The officer in charge, a tall man with sun-scorched skin and sharp eyes, asked, "You took out an airfield? Alone?" Stoutt allowed a faint smile. "Not the whole thing, just enough." The realization settled among the crew. He had faced 40 armed aircraft and a full anti-aircraft perimeter, and he had walked away. The inferno on Peleliu had been his doing. Alone, he had altered the course of the landing operation. Marines storming the beaches in 3 days would face fewer enemy aircraft. He had tilted the odds in their favor. Exhaustion finally overtook him as they pulled him aboard the destroyer. His body sagged against the deck, every joint and muscle aching. The fear, tension, and certainty of death had drained away, leaving only a raw, hard-won relief. He had survived, and more importantly, he had achieved the impossible. The deck of the destroyer rocked beneath him as Stoutt tried to catch his breath. Every muscle screamed in protest. His lungs burned from the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He leaned against the rail, eyes fixed on the distant smoke rising from the Peleliu airfield. The inferno still smoldered, a blackened scar across the island. But he knew, quietly, with a grim certainty, that the threat had been neutralized. 40 planes had been rendered useless, their crews either dead or scattered. Thousands of Marines preparing for the amphibious assault would have a fighting chance, and for Stoutt, that was the only victory that mattered. Around him, sailors whispered among themselves, disbelief etched into their faces. Some shook their heads, muttering under their breath at the audacity of a single pilot taking on an entire airfield. Others simply stared, awed by the sheer courage and precision of the operation. One young sailor, barely 20, approached him hesitantly. "Sir, you really did this alone?" Stoutt nodded, still catching his breath. Alone doesn't mean hopeless, just determined. He gave the faintest shrug, as if to downplay the magnitude of what he had done. But even he couldn't deny the truth. That 12 seconds of machine gun fire, executed perfectly under extreme conditions, had changed the course of an entire battle. The destroyer's officers quickly assessed the damaged Hellcat, now lying somewhere beneath the waves. Recovery was impossible. It was gone. But the man who had flown it, battered, bruised, and pushed beyond every imaginable limit, was alive. And alive meant that intelligence, reconnaissance, and human courage, age had triumphed over mechanical superiority. As the crew stabilized him on the deck, Stoutt allowed himself a moment of reflection. His mind replayed the flight. The instant the first tracers hit his wings, the roaring explosions across the airfield, the fleeting seconds when survival seemed impossible. He remembered the faces of the Japanese pilots, frozen in confusion and fear as their meticulously arranged aircraft erupted in fire. He remembered calculating the trajectories, estimating distances, and choosing targets with surgical precision. Every decision, every adjustment had to be perfect. There was no margin for error. And yet, amid all the chaos, there had been clarity. The clarity of a man who knew that hesitation meant death, that timidity meant failure, and that courage, sometimes, was measured in split seconds and calculated risks. Later, in the officer's wardroom, the destroyer's captain approached him. His expression was a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Major Stoutt, your actions today, I don't even know how to begin. You saved lives, countless lives. The Marines landing on Peleliu, they'll owe you a debt they may never know." Stoutt simply nodded. Words felt inadequate. He had always known that a pilot's duty was not about glory. It was about results. And today, the results were undeniable. The airfield was neutralized, the Japanese threat diminished, and the lives of his fellow Americans had been spared. That was all that mattered. As night fell, the destroyer sailed away from Peleliu, leaving behind the blackened remains of the airfield. Stoutt stood at the rail, staring at the ocean stretching endlessly around him. In the silence, he could hear echoes of the battle. The roar of engines, the crackle of gunfire, the screams of aircraft tearing through the sky. But they were ghosts now, memories imprinted on a day that would never be forgotten. His thoughts turned briefly to the Marines who would storm the beaches. They would not see him. They would not know the danger that had been removed from their path. Yet, in that anonymity, there was satisfaction. The essence of heroism, he realized, was not recognition. It was action. And action, concise and decisive, had saved them all. In the weeks that followed, reports of the Peleliu assault filtered back through the chain of command. Intelligence noted that air support had been diminished, and the initial landings encountered significantly less aerial resistance than anticipated. Somewhere, buried in the pages of operational reports, was Stout's contribution, the solo attack that had shifted the tide. It would be a quiet legacy, unheralded by headlines, but its impact was undeniable. Stoutt himself returned to the air, flying further reconnaissance missions, engaging in dogfights, and supporting ground troops. The moniker, Cowboy, stuck, a nod not just to his skill, but to his daring, fearless approach to the impossible. He remained humble, often deflecting praise and attributing success to luck, timing, or teamwork. But those who knew the truth understood that Stout's courage and precision had altered history. On the anniversary of the Peleliu operation, Stoutt visited the island briefly, accompanied by a small contingent of Marines. He walked the beaches, noting where defensive positions had once been and where his bullets had claimed enemy aircraft. The scars of war were still visible, craters, rusted wreckage, and scorched earth, but they were also a testament to survival and to the strategic importance of every action taken that day. Standing atop a ridge overlooking the northern airfield, Stoutt allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the decision-making under fire, the precision required, and the sheer isolation of those minutes above the airfield. A single pilot, a single Hellcat, and 12 seconds of controlled machine gun fire had saved hundreds, perhaps thousands. It was a lesson in courage, timing, and responsibility that would stay with him forever. As he left Peleliu, Stoutt looked toward the horizon, toward the endless Pacific and the next mission awaiting him. There would always be another challenge, another flight, another test of skill and nerve. But the memory of that day, the inferno of the airfield, the trembling of the Hellcat under fire, and the salvation of countless Marines would remain an indelible mark.